distance of students in Texas, and that will be grounded in the real college survey data. So I look forward to working with you on this and other activities.
And Jennifer, are you here? Introduce yourself.
Hi, sorry everyone, my Zoom was not working correctly. My name is Jennifer King, and I am a practitioner researcher on the institutional transformation team. So I am really excited to to observe today and to eventually work with all of you during this process. So thank you.
And Sarah?
Okay, good morning. I'm so happy to be here with all of you today. My friends, my Texas friends, I so wish that we could be there in person. For those of you I've not had a chance or a pleasure of meeting, I'm Sarah Goldrick-Reb. I'm a professor of sociology and medicine here at Temple University, and I have the incredible privilege of serving as president and founder of the Hope Center for College Community and Justice. And I just cannot say enough. I've been waiting all week for this moment and to get us moving and to have the honor of really supporting you as you do this incredibly hard work of supporting your students in the midst of a global pandemic. So excited to be talking with you. I'll be back in just a couple minutes to talk some more after Angelina gives you a little overview.
Yeah, thanks. So I'm just going to quickly sort of go over the agenda that we have for today. But while I'm doing that, I would like to have you all introduce yourselves. There's 86 people on this call, so I'm not going to make us go around. That would take 2 hours for everyone to say hello and introduce themselves. But I will ask that you do so in the chat. So if you could put your name, the institution that you're at, and your title or role. And then for a little bit of fun, the last TV series or podcast series that you binged, or if you are not a binger, the last one that you watched or listened to that you enjoyed. And while you do that, I will get us started here. You know, it always takes a minute. Sorry, folks. Get us settled. Okay. So we're going to be talking today. We're going to do just a brief overview of who we are, the Hope Center, why we're doing this work, why this work is so important, why we care about it. And then we'll get into this initiative and what you can expect from joining this work, how we'll sort of proceed over the next year. And then we'll sort of end with some time for questions. I will be monitoring the chat, so if you have questions throughout, you can also feel free to type them in the chat, and we'll make sure that those get addressed either in real time or towards the end. I also just want to mention before we kick off that we are recording this session, just so you're aware. That's so that we can share it out with any colleagues that maybe weren't able to join today or in the future. So just a heads up for that. I'm going to turn it over to Sarah now to get us started.
Okay, terrific. Thank you so much, Angelina. So I'm glad that you all are getting to meet some of the members of our team. You're going to be getting to meet many more. Before I start telling you a little bit about the Hope Center, for those of you that are not as familiar with us, I do want to thank and acknowledge several of our partners who are in the room here today, starting with Cynthia Farrell, who makes all good things possible these days. We find she's a wonderful partner for us. At the Texas Student Success Center, along with Jacob Frere. They both have been instrumental in making this opportunity possible. And we're so grateful. And I know, Cynthia, that you are also joined by the Pathways coaches. And I just want to say to all of you, we're so pleased to be working with you and grateful for your partnership in this effort. And the same thing goes for Generation Hope, with whom we will also be collaborating in this work. I know that's a lot of different people, and you're probably going like, whoa, which partner am I going to talk to when? Don't worry, there's a plan. And we promise to do our darndest not to overwhelm you. Okay. And I just want to say that right up front. We totally recognize how much is going on for you, your colleges, your families, your community, that this pandemic is ongoing, that you have a lot on your plate. We're not here to suggest that you're not already doing a lot of work. Okay, we know that you are. So I thank you and I appreciate you. And I'm just glad that we can have a little time with you this morning. I want to recognize that while the Hope Center has done a fair bit of work in Texas, particularly over the last 5 years, we have not had the opportunity to work with all of you. And I know here today we have 17 colleges represented. We are hoping very shortly to have all 50 of you represented, and that is in the works as we speak. So I want to make sure for those watching now, who are just getting to know us, and for those who might watch this video in the future, that I give you a little bit of a level set on what Hope is and is not, and help you kind of see where this work that we're going to do together fits in to our broader work and to work that's happening at colleges all over the country. So the first thing you need to know about the Hope Center is that we're a little bit of an unusual bird. We kind of boldly and assertively attempt to combine scientific research with actual application to practice and policy change, all in one organization. I'm sure you're accustomed to research centers that do research and think tanks that do the policy and advocacy and intermediary organizations that do TA. We're trying to do it all in the service of a vision that says that every student should have their basic needs secured so that they can learn. We think that all being on the same team allows us to more effectively think about translation. We want to be sure that when we're talking with you about lessons that you can actually implement, that it really comes from science, that we're not driving it based on anecdote, but based on hard data. Similarly, we want to make sure that we give you recommendations that you can actually do, that make sense, that are not so pie in the sky that, you might go, that's nice, and kind of throw it out the door. So our teams across the organization are organized both by project and by function. Before the pandemic began, we were about a dozen people. These days, we're approximately 30, and we have about 15 open slots that we're going to be filling by the end of the summer. So that means lots of new faces. I can promise you we're going to have additional staff in Texas within a matter of months, and we are working from coast to coast. So you might be talking to a colleague out in Los Angeles who says, I'm getting technical assistance from the Hope Center, and they are from the same initiative. This morning, we were already with Ohio, and last week we were with North Carolina and New York. I'll explain a bit later about why that is, but suffice it to say, coast to coast. The work that we're doing to advance students' basic needs is part of a movement that we call Real College. Some of you, I think, had the opportunity to join us in Houston in pre-pandemic times, which I believe was the fall of 2019, which goodness feels like a decade ago. We were grateful that Houston Community College hosted our last in-person Real College convening where we were able to come together. The Real College movement is all about connecting people who do this hard work to help students with food and housing and transportation and childcare in service of an agenda that creates structural change. It's really important at a time when people working on issues of poverty, for example, can feel profoundly isolated from one another, who often feel like they're climbing mountains, that they realize that they're not alone. And that's the origin of our movement. We learned that this work was happening. We learned that people were doing it in isolation. We learned that, like the students, everybody was feeling pretty lonely, and we brought you together. And we've been doing this work since 2015 together. You have peers from coast to coast, as I noted, not only doing technical assistance, but participating in this conversation about what it means to be a 21st century college today. That term, Real College, comes from MTV's Real World. I very much hope that you all know what that means. When I say it's time to stop being polite and start getting real, we're going to do that a lot with you. There are things that just have to be said and truths that have to be talked about. And we try to raise those things up. There's a hashtag in front of Real College for a reason. It's there because we carry this conversation onto social media. So if you go on social media, whether it's LinkedIn or Instagram or Twitter, some of you are really active there, You can find other colleagues to collaborate with and talk with and find confidence in and form friendships with, and so on and so forth. And again, we do this and we give you this bigger picture and we work hard collaboratively because we are working on systemic change. So we see each of you and your colleagues as part of a growing ecosystem of support that, when combined with effective and influential state and federal policies, can help make sure that when a student comes into the classroom, they are there ready to learn and able to focus on school. Next slide. So all of the work that we're going to do together over the next year is guided by our theory of change. And as I said, we have a vision statement that students receive the basic supports they need to succeed. And this includes a set of inputs that lead both to short-term or proximate outcomes, the things in the middle of this chart, and the longer-term outcomes that we are increasingly focused on and held accountable for. So in other words, if we want to say, for example, that we're going to secure students' basic needs, we have to do a set of things together. And all of the TA that we're going to do this year are organized around these things. So they're all on the left-hand side. This chart is also on our website, and we'll be distributing it for you so that you can look at it more closely and more frequently, hopefully in coming days. It includes things like, as a starting point, identifying basic needs security as central to the academic enterprise. When that happens on a campus, you'll hear leaders like yourselves talking about, for example, the close connection between whether or not a student has slept and their readiness to learn. On a campus where that connection has not been made and that's not talked about, you'll hear more discussion about non-academic issues or things that are not in our control or stuff that happens off campus that has nothing to do with us. Okay, so the first part of the work is really making those connections. They are empirical facts, but they need to also be part of the water on your campus. They need to be understood and they need to be explored. So that's one sort of activity that leads to good outcomes. Another type of activity has to do with partnerships. Now, again, I know many of you have been on campuses throughout your state, and I can tell you that you have a huge different range of partnerships depending on where you are. It varies by region, it varies by the size of the institution. Some of you are working with your local mechanic. Some of you are working with your local United Way. Some of you are working with your local housing authority. Some of you are working with your transit authority. Partnerships are critical and they are hard. And so one thing we're going to help you to think about is, what are the terms of good partnerships? How can you establish partnerships and bridge partnerships where they are not? And how do you make sure that partnerships are in fact successful for your students? Now, Carrie's here today because one of the big things that we have to do together is really work on state and federal policy change. And you all have a really important role to play in that. For example, if we're going to continue to expand access so that students can qualify for affordable housing, then there's a road of advocacy, of sharing stories, of collecting data, and of just putting our hands up and saying that those of us teaching and working in higher education care about affordable housing. And when we understand it as critical to our students. So that'll be another topic that we get to. We're also going to work on students' financial support systems. We're going to talk a lot about financial aid, but we're also going to talk about going beyond financial aid. We're going to talk about some of the real intricacies. I think you can count on us to get in the weeds with you if that's where you want to go. So we can talk about the EFC, the expected family contribution, and what it really measures and what it really doesn't, and what you might give to a student who has a zero expected family contribution in addition to a FAFSA form. We're also going to talk a bit about what happens in the classroom in terms of teaching and pedagogy. It's not going to be a major focus of this effort, but because faculty are the front line, they're the ones in the daily interactions with your students, we are going to give you some tips and some tools for engaging them. And finally, it shouldn't surprise anyone that we're going to equip you to not only use our data or turn to us for help with data, but be able to collect it yourselves. We think that the tools are not that difficult. The skills are easily attainable, and making this part of your regular practice will reduce your reliance on outside folks to get that kind of work done. What this will lead to over time is a more integrated and holistic understanding of the whole student. We genuinely want you to be able to see when a student walks in the whole person. We want you to fully know why it's important that you ask, for example, how many family members are you caring for? They may have children, they may have cousins, they may have grandparents to take care of. If you don't know that fact, you're going to have a harder time supporting the student, even just understanding the student. We're going to support you in your collaborative activities with others. We're going to support you in your coordinated activities across your campus. And we're going to support you in making better connections with students to enhance their learning. Now, we're very outcomes focused. Any good scientist, would be, and we certainly are driving towards some tangible things that I know that the state of Texas cares a lot about too. So we want students to see improvements in their grades. We want them passing their dev ed coursework. We want them to, complete the credits they started. We want them to retain and graduate and transfer and so on at higher rates. We also understand that stuff doesn't happen overnight and begins with students really feeling supported and engaged on your campus and also in their life outside of your campus. And so all of those things will receive attention here. Next slide. So, it's July 2021. We've had a lot of work in Texas for a number of years. Why in the world is today, of all days, the time when we finally get to launch Real College Texas with all of you? Well, frankly, it's because of the pandemic. And it's because of the myriad economic impacts that have come from the pandemic, the greater awareness that has come from the pandemic, the heightened inequality, both in terms of wealth and race ethnicity. We see all of those things. They've been laid bare, they're stark, and the weaknesses in our ecosystems have become clearer than ever. And that has compelled an important set of partners, who I'll describe in a few minutes, to say to the Hope Center, let's really get something going here. Let's dig in together on this work. And let's try to see if we can not only get through the pandemic, but transform in ways that make us better, and frankly, also make us more prepared for what comes next. We all know we're dealing with a lot of uncertainty, but one thing is for sure, you and your students will deal with uncertainty better if there are ecosystems of support around them. Next slide. What are all the different kinds of things folks are dealing with? Well, if you've ever seen me give a talk, you're acquainted with the new economics of college. I just want to give you a few highlights, especially if you're new to this work. So anyone working in higher education knows that the price burden on students is higher than in the past. And you all know that it's not just about tuition, okay? You know that it's about the price of rent and the price of food and so on. Something you might not have thought quite as much about, if you haven't especially had the bandwidth to think about it, is really what's changed in your students' families, not just over the last decade or two, but even over the last year. So the job losses that we saw, the unexpected financial expenses, these caused hits to any sort of assets or wealth that families had built. The kinds of nest eggs that they turn to when a student is in college and they need to provide extra support. Those inequalities, as I noted earlier, have deepened along racial lines. Okay, African-American families, Latinx families, Indigenous families had less wealth to start with, and they lost more during the pandemic. They also took a disproportionate hit in terms of actual loss of family members during this time. Some of your students will be coming back with fewer people in their family networks. They will have fewer people to turn to if they need an extra $50. Now, I want you to think about when you went to college. When you needed $100, How many people could you think of who could provide that to you? And if you didn't have very many, what did that cause you to do or not do in your life? Some of these students are going to be coming back thinking, well, 2 years ago or last year, I would have turned to my grandfather, and this year he's gone. These things are going to play themselves out in terms of what we see in basic needs insecurities. It's going to play itself out in terms of students' stress levels. Unfortunately, the social safety net is also not really there for them in the way that they need. Now, there have been some good things happening, and one thing I want to highlight is the child tax credit. Your students right now, the vast majority of your students with children should be receiving in their bank accounts very shortly $300 a month per child, up to $600 a month. It's a big moment that that money is coming to them if they have been paying taxes, okay? That's a critical support, and I think it's a big deal that it's coming. But in other ways, they have received less support, even less support than other adults during the pandemic. For many months during the pandemic, they did not qualify for stimulus checks, even though they really needed them. For many months during the pandemic, they were subject to work requirements in order to qualify for food stamps or SNAP, even though other people weren't. Again, some improvements have been made, but the insufficiency of today's social safety net, and in particular, the ways in which whatever the safety net is, seems misaligned with the goals of today's colleges and students, is leaving students out. Working during college has become incredibly hard. The changes in the hospitality industry that we've been experiencing during the pandemic will make that even tougher. And finally, challenges to students' health and well-being will continue to loom large. How many of you have asked your students to self-report whether they've been infected with COVID, for example? Are you reading the studies that show that long COVID is playing itself out? These are going to be important things. Our research is detecting significant lasting consequences of having had COVID for students' anxiety, depression, and food security. So these are all forces that we're going to be dealing with. And the only way to deal with this is in collaboration and in connection with each other. This is too much for any single staff member or any single president to deal with alone. This is only something that we can do by talking about it and working through it as a community that is trying to genuinely help the students, the staff, faculty, administrators, to help all of us survive. Next slide. So there are some opportunities in front of us. Opportunities to help students succeed, opportunities to continue to become student ready. I actually think we should make that, we should change that language a little bit. It's not even becoming student ready, it's becoming, right? It's the ing that matters, the ing. It's a process. It's not a state of being. It's an ongoing activity. Fortunately, there are some funds available. One of those types of funds is the Higher Education Relief Funds from the federal government. This latest wave in particular was a lot of money, and it comes with some challenges and it comes with some opportunities. We will engage you in discussion about those opportunities. We're also happy to help you to the extent that we can work through those challenges. Next slide. So let's talk a little bit about those folks who brought us here today. This particular opportunity was instigated by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Last year, when the pandemic hit, they decided that while their higher education agenda did not officially include basic needs or emergency aid, they thought it was important during the pandemic to try to provide some support. And they did a couple of different things. One of the things that they did was provide us with some money so that we could do some research on the emergency aid practices that you all have been doing during the pandemic, and to try to help with some learnings about what it means to scale emergency aid. And we've been doing that work for the last year, and this fall we will have a report out. Many of you have provided data for that, and we appreciate that. In addition, they provided funding for technical assistance, and they did that in partnership with the Rockefeller Philanthropy Advisors. The intermediaries who worked with us on this effort include Jobs for the Future through the Student Success Center Network and NASPA. And combined, those two folks brought the Hope Center to the table here to be the ones to provide this assistance. And in particular, we are honored to be able to offer it in 5 different states. So in addition to working with you all in Texas, currently 17, but as I said, we're working closely with the Texas Student Success Center to see if we can't bring all 50 together. We are also working with the district in Los Angeles, the whole district. We're working in New York with 4 colleges. We're working in North Carolina. And as I said this morning, we were in Ohio. I think there's a lot of really great synergies and benefits to you all from the fact that this work is happening in multiple places. The biggest synergy is that we're going to be able to take lessons and share them. Of course, your context is specific and it matters. And, we know how true that is in Texas. We know that no 2 of your colleges are alike. We're not going to offer you cookie cutter advice, but we are going to help you if, for example, you want to try something and you're looking for a peer who's also done it. We can help you connect not only in your own state, but beyond your state. Next slide. So now, before transitioning to Angelina, who will give you a sense of the roadmap ahead, I want to offer a few kind of definitions, terms, and ideas, along with a little bit of data, particularly for those of you who are, again, new to this. For those who are totally familiar with these things, I'm also hoping I'll say a few things that will help you to kind of deepen your understanding. Next slide. The first thing I want you to think about is what did we mean when we say students' basic needs? And what do we mean when we say basic needs insecurity? The Hope Center offers the definition on your screen. Go ahead and take a look. So for those of you who are on the phone who might not be able to see this, we say that students' basic needs include access to nutritious and sufficient food, safe, secure, and adequate housing, healthcare, affordable technology and transportation, resources for personal hygiene, and childcare and related needs. Clearly, this goes beyond food. Now, as you do your work on your own campus, you will also need to define what those basic needs include. You may have additional things that we don't have here, okay? You may decide some of these items you just don't feel are part of a student's basic needs. Regardless, defining the terms will help your community to understand what exactly you're trying to put in your ecosystem and what you consider outside of it. Next slide. When we talk about insecurity versus security, I want to emphasize that we do not view that part, the security or insecurity, as inherent to the student. Okay? We're not suggesting that anyone came out of the womb inherently basic needs insecure. What we have here is a structural problem. It's a characteristic, a condition that is affecting the student, and it's changeable. So what we're hoping is that we can turn basic needs insecure students into basic needs secure students by putting an ecosystem in place to ensure that their needs are met. You, again, are going to need a definition for your campus so that you will know if a student is in one category or is in another. People do fluctuate. There is change. There is variability. Okay, that's actually, that volatility is unfortunately one of the hallmarks of poverty. But it's important to have conversations that help move from labeling an individual to labeling the structure that contains the problem so that people can focus on where the change is actually possible and impactful. Next slide. Students need Maslow if they're going to bloom. We're going to offer you a number of different sayings like this throughout this engagement. If you like, you can even get them on our t-shirts. And we do this, frankly, because if you're going to change the narrative, then you're going to have to do it by helping people connect with the ideas. okay? In this case, I'm sure you're familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs and Bloom's taxonomy of learning. And, you know, this kind of stuff, I have to say, when I put this on the screen, I'm going to be really honest with you. I can feel my grandmother. I lost my grandmother about 5 years ago, but I can feel her laughter. And what she would say to me is what she said to me when I declared my major in college, when I told her I was going to be a sociologist. She said, Sarah, sociology is the statement of the obvious. And I think she's right. And I think it's powerful. So K-12 teachers, they know this inherently. They know they can't walk into a classroom and expect to teach a third grader if that third grader has not had breakfast. And that's what we're talking about here. But unfortunately, there are a lot of folks working in higher ed who haven't had the space, time, or inclination to grapple with these ideas yet. And so one of the things that we hope to do is to be able to help them do that. Next slide. So let's quickly take a look at a little bit of data. As Carrie noted, we have been collecting data in Texas, and we just want to make sure that we give you both some national numbers and some Texas numbers if in the event that you haven't seen our latest reports. These latest data come from last fall. As you look at the numbers, I want you to remember that between last summer and last fall, a lot of students left higher education, a disproportionate number compared to prior years. Students who were most at risk, right? Students who were most likely to be homeless, students who were more likely to be at risk of food insecurity. They were more likely to just not be there in the fall. And we could only detect basic needs security levels for those who were. In other words, we're probably understating the problem with the next set of numbers. Next slide. So we saw a number of things. We observed what I know many of you have seen on your own campuses: students having trouble concentrating, students displaying anxiety, students losing jobs, students taking care of family members while attending class. Again, some of those family members are children and some of them are not. And that situation is made more complex and varies more across your state depending on whether the public schools were open or closed. Next slide. Basic needs insecurity. Looks like we might have missed one slide there. Angelina, can you go back and see if it's there or if it's just missing, in which case I'll cover it. Okay, no problem. I'll just cover it. So basic needs insecurity rates on the whole were 61% across all students. We saw that the two-year college students had disproportionately high rates of basic needs insecurity. Food insecurity was affecting about 40% of students, and housing insecurity was affecting even more. Homelessness rates were widespread. At many of your colleges, we have collected data repeatedly over time. And what we can say is that it didn't look like the rates of these challenges were necessarily heightened during the pandemic, but they probably would have been if those students who had dropped out were in fact still enrolled. Okay, and I want you to think about that because this is an ongoing issue. We're going to be helping you to continue to assess your students, and you may see fluctuating patterns over time. Go ahead and go to the next slide now, Angelina. Thank you. Okay. Some of you are very focused on equity and very focused on those gaps then. We will talk with you about many different ways of looking at those gaps, and I just want to highlight two of them for now. One is, for example, the Black-White gap. The Black-White gap in basic needs insecurity is 16 percentage points, with Black students being far more likely than white students to experience these challenges. That gap, the size of that gap, is very, very similar to the size of the Black-White gap in college completion. Another gap that we're going to talk a lot about, and I'm so glad that Jen Hope will be doing it with us, is the gap between what's happening to students with children, who we call parenting students to reflect the ongoing act of parenting, and students without children or non-parents. While there are some ways in which people with children have more access to resources, for example, it's a little bit easier to get SNAP, they also face much higher expenses, and they face a condition called time poverty, where they simply have less time in the day to be able to make ends meet, to manage expenses, and so on. And so they experience basic needs insecurity at particularly high rates, and it's particularly consequential. So for example, I'd like you to think about a father sitting in one of your classrooms. If that father is cutting the size of his meals or skipping meals on a daily basis, in other words, if he's food insecure, there's a decent chance that the children in his home are also experiencing those things. Certainly, if he's running late on a utility bill or hasn't been able to pay it, the students are also experiencing those conditions. Sorry, not the students, his children are experiencing those conditions. What that means for your college is that you have a real opportunity to not only help that student and help him stay on track to graduation, which can create great returns for both him and your community, but you also have a chance to help his kids. And when you do that, it not only feels good, it really does pay off. There's a payoff there for those children that will come back to your college over time, as they are more likely to be able to finish high school, become working and earning adults, pay taxes, and so on and so forth. So this is really, in my view, the major opportunity of the nation's community colleges in addressing students' basic needs. It's to have spillover effects, to start with individuals, to support whole families, to support whole communities, to support regions, to support your state, and of course, to support the rest of the nation. Next slide. We're going to talk with you a lot about problems that you can actually do something about. Now, I know it's really tough to look at a number like 14% homelessness and think, how do I get that to go down? The starting point is to focus on the gaps. The gaps that we're most concerned about are the gap between the percent of students who need something and the percent of students who actually get support. The gaps are really, really big. For example, among the students who were food insecure in the data we collected last fall, just 18% actually access SNAP. Imagine if we could say that 100% of students on your campus who needed help with food found their way to at least one support. Imagine that we could eliminate the number on the screen there that says 50% of students dealing with basic needs insecurity did not apply for supports because they did not know how. What if 100% of students knew how? Heck, what if even 75% of students knew how? And what if the students who were the least likely to use supports were the focus of those efforts? I've been in the food pantries, again, on many of your campuses. I can tell you that while white women experience food insecurity at pretty high rates, they shouldn't be as overrepresented in those pantries as they are. We should see more students of color, and in particular, more Black male students using these supports because they have just as high rates of need, if not higher. These are the kinds of things we can talk about together. Who's using what? Who is coming forward without any urging, and who needs some additional changes, nudges, supports of affirmation, destigmatization, whatever it is, a different approach in order to be connected with supports. That troubleshooting will be a key part of our work together. Next slide. Here's some data from Texas. This is all contained in the report that is on our website. If you have not seen it, we really urge you to do so. We have data from 10 of your community colleges. Go ahead to the next slide. And here's what we found. So the numbers are very, very similar to the national averages, as I noted. Just under 2/3 of students were experiencing basic needs insecurity, about half were housing insecure, a little fewer were food insecure, and 15% had experienced homelessness. I promise you that by the time you're done with us, you will know exactly what each of those terms means, how to measure it, how to talk about it, how to approach a student and be able to have a conversation about it, and of course, how to help them get support. Next slide. We can focus on a number of different areas, but one of the things that we will focus on in Texas in particular has to do with emergency aid. We are engaged in this year-long study of emergency aid around the country. And one of the things that we are concerned about, for example, is that students at community colleges seem to have lower levels of even awareness of the programs compared to students at other schools. So this is not about necessarily the number of resources available to help, but the simple act of awareness speaks to different practices that we can use to spread the word, okay? It is helpful to students to know that you're trying to get them support, even when you cannot actually connect them to dollars. But I just wanted to offer that as one example. Next slide. Okay, so I hope that's given you a little bit of a sense of where we're coming from and how we're approaching this work, why we're doing it, and what some of the learning will be about. And what I want to do now is turn things over to Angelina to give you some more specifics, and then we'll be very happy to take your questions. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm just going to go over sort of what this engagement will look like with us over the next year. So we've decided to make most of these live sessions, all of these live sessions actually, take place virtually. So we will be meeting sort of regularly over the next, not quite a year, it's like 9 months or so, and I'll go over those dates in these live sessions. And between those, there will also be asynchronous opportunities to engage, both with your team at your institution, but also as part of a broader coalition across the state. There will be, some pre-work, some pre-readings that we'll be asking you to think about, maybe some activities that you'll be doing leading up to those sessions to get you sort of ready to engage with those topics, as well as some post-work of, okay, here's what we just did. Now take this back to your campus or talk about this with some of your, for example, institutional research peers, and continue to move forward. We're also, as Sarah had mentioned sort of in the beginning, going to be partnering closely with the Pathways coaches that you all have been working very closely with to provide some coaching on these topics. So between the sessions that we're doing, you'll be, again, going back with your teams and accessing coaching as you needed for questions that you might have, or really getting into the details of what does this mean on our specific campus? We have this gap, like what do we do about it? That's the coaching will be available to you. And then, as I mentioned, sort of working with this coalition and being able to access us, we'll have an open communication channel. We are going to be offering a Slack channel so that you all can very quickly sort of ask us questions or share some successes with each other. Such a benefit of this work is that coalition that you'll have access to across your state. And there's so much value in being able to connect across your institutions, both to, share challenges, but also, share advice. Like, hey, this really worked for us, that sort of thing. The topics that we'll be talking about, these activities, you should have received these as part of the some of the one-pagers that we shared with you all. We'll start with really getting into the data. As we've talked about and shown, like, the data is really important. Important to get sort of beyond the anecdotal data, those stories and the information that you're hearing from students, from faculty, being able to assess your students' basic needs in a rigorous and regular way so that you can really start to address these basic needs and securities across your campus. So our research team will be working with your institutional research team and some of the other roles that may play a really important part in gathering these data that are critical. And from there, we'll look at that data and really analyze it, help you think about building your capacity to use that data to inform strategies that will help students either access available resources or utilize those resources, maybe using that data to inform what new resources may need to be created or new processes about how they access or utilize resources. We'll also think about analyzing that data so that you can use it to connect with local organizations or agencies and public services, right? Because this is an ecosystem that exists beyond just the institution. There's also going to be an assignment, which we've sort of previewed a bit with some of those pre-reads, sort of two pieces of an assessment, really. And the first will be sort of like a self-assessment for you to assess your basic needs supports across the various areas of the institution that are really important to building and supporting that ecosystem where students have what they need to succeed and to really thrive as individuals. This assessment will also be a tool for your team to kind of understand the areas that you want to really focus on, dig into, and build capacity around, kind of serve as a map for you to understand where you want to go, both with this engagement with us, but then sort of, broader, longer term. And then, as I mentioned, you'll also have access to coaching, and this self-assessment will really provide sort of a conversation piece for you with those coaches to address specific areas or challenges you're having, and be able to ask really targeted questions, thinking about how you want to proceed. We've also asked you to think about an asset map, and we've provided, a couple links, like a toolkit sort of thing that you can choose to use or use your own format. Basically an activity, get you thinking about the different offices across your campus or campuses that are providing basic needs support, and how are they connected internally, but also externally to some of those important organizations and agencies that support this work. So we'll continue to kind of be talking about this asset mapping exercise over this engagement, providing some additional instructions, and it'll be a piece of conversation for a while. It did not need to be done before this session or even the next. It will be something that's sort of ongoing. And I'll talk a bit more about like dates and timing things in a bit. And in some of the later sessions, we're also going to work with specific areas of your college responsible for support. So financial aid, like one, emergency aid, and also benefits. And really sort of bringing together all the stakeholders that may play a part. So for example, marketing staff or communications staff, thinking about how students learn about those supports, financial aid officers, bringing those folks in, maybe even government or community relations folks to really think about the whole picture of how these supports exist on your campus, how they're being utilized. And then last, as Sarah had sort of mentioned, policy and advocacy is going to be a really important piece of this too. So, what does it look like for you and your institution to engage with this topic at the local level, across as a state, and then really thinking about federal too. So identifying roles across your institution that can really advocate for these policies. It's incredibly important because, as education leaders, you have a lot of influence and really extensive knowledge. You know your students, and you also know your experience in doing this work. And that experience and knowledge can really be influential for policy. We're also going to be thinking and talking about funding, right? Because it's such an important piece of this, both within your state, but also thinking about, okay, how do you access philanthropic dollars? That can't be the only way that you rely on doing this work, but it's an important piece, and we know that. So we want to talk about that as well, so that this ecosystem is really supported for your region in a sustainable way. So in thinking about these activities, we want to also be sort of asking you to think about who should attend. We have lots of folks on this call, so I'm certain that you already have your teams or some of your teams here today with you, which is so great. It may differ. You may choose to sort of have some folks attend depending on what topic is being covered, or you bring your team the whole time. I think we're going to leave that to you. We'll definitely have some advice about who is most important to be engaging in the topic. But really, we just want to build sort of a culture of cross collaboration across the institution and sort of raise up the champions of this work. So specifically who that might include, institutional research, hammer in that home. It's important to be having the folks that are working with and providing these data. Financial aid officers, student support services folks, like I said, some marketing folks, communication staff, student life, academic advisors. You may consider bringing in some student leaders. That can be really powerful on your campus, or faculty that are really engaged with this work and can really sort of connect with their peers on this effort. We've seen librarians that engage with this work because they are, face to face with students often and understand their needs and what they're going through. So lots of different folks that you could bring in. And, of course, if you have questions about that or anything, we're always happy to talk more about it. In terms of timeline, I'd sort of referenced this. This is sort of what we've got coming up over the next year. To have all these dates in that one pager that I sent, you'll be getting sort of the invites and whatnot from me soon. I do want to just highlight a couple things here. I think it's important to note that topic 3, that's the different supports, financial aid, emergency aid, benefits, that kind of spans across a couple months, and there will be activities and conversations between those sessions. And then I'll call out what feels like very far away, but we know that time flies, is that mapping exercise, which is going to be due on March 1st. And we really want to keep that sort of in the front of our minds because it's a heavy activity. It takes a lot, right? We're really asking you to go to the various offices across your institution that are providing any sort of basic needs supports. Ask them to really look at what are we providing, who's providing those supports, how are students accessing them, and then take all of that information back and look across and say, are there gaps? Is there overlap? And is that overlap helpful, right? Is it great that there are ways for students to access these supports in multiple ways, or could we be more efficient? So we'll be having a lot of conversations about that over the course of time. The mapping exercises do kind of between 2 sessions that are focused on the mapping, the asset mapping. So we'll talk a bit about it. You'll have already been working on it. We'll talk more specifically about it. We'll go back and work on it and finalize it. And then we'll move forward at the end of March with that. So I just talked quite a bit at you and I want to make sure that we leave lots of room for questions and conversation. So I will actually stop sharing my screen so we can all see each other, and we'll start taking any questions that you may have. There's lots of us on this call, so feel free to unmute yourself and talk, or raise your hand, or in the chat if you're not comfortable talking any of that way. Any of those ways can work.
We encourage your feedback, your questions, your thoughts, your recommendations. I just want to emphasize that ours is a learning organization. We are constantly learning from our partners and refining our work. If you've worked with us, you know that we love to hear from you. So please feel free both now and throughout the process to, share your ideas with us. Tell us where we're doing something that could be better, and giving us those thoughts, not just at the end of this initiative, but throughout it. So curious for any thoughts, questions, observations, etc.
Thank you for the research,
Well, if
and
I
I'm
may,
very
Sarah.
impressed. Oh, I'm sorry, there's probably 2 of us talking. Oh, right.
Okay,
I
why don't you go ahead and
apologize.
go first, Letitia, and then I'll call on the next person. Thank you.
My apology.
Sure.
Thank you again for this work and research, and we're excited to be, part of this process. In regards to our teams, as Angelina mentioned, so we can actually invite them at different components as related. Because I know I'm thinking of our policy person, who would be coming in at the last session, but we have, individuals who are involved with student parents, and we have our advocacy director, so they could be involved at various components of the presentations.
Yes, absolutely. And I think, to be honest with you, that is one of the upshots of this being virtual, right?
Perfect.
It is much easier to do that. We have plenty of space here. and no concerns, about folks doing that. We are also recording, and hope to continue to record sessions so that if you say, I just really want my person to be able to watch that, my teammate or my colleague, because that conversation would be so helpful for them to hear, then we'll provide that. Okay, I don't have concerns about those things. Your conversations that you have in coaching, obviously probably not recorded, but I do want to emphasize that we understand. And I actually think, by the way, that the extent to which you start thinking, oh, I really want to, engage this person, or, oh, I didn't think about that person till later. I'm taking those as real signs of your engagement, and also progress. Right? Because really, it's amazing how much the world opens up in terms of who could be involved in campus, the more you understand where the issues are coming from and what the students are dealing with. So, I love that Angelina mentioned librarians to you. They have been amazingly engaged partners in this work for many years. We have found custodial staff that have been on task forces and been instrumental in saying, this is where you can find the students who come in very early in the morning, right? Or here's where they're sleeping, or, you think you don't have this issue, but you do. Your general counsel, your lawyers, very important folks. I mean, so much so in so many ways that might be both expected and unexpected. So please do feel free, just share the calendaring with them, share with them whatever it is that they need to be here.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Of course. And where is the other individual who was hoping to jump in? Oh, you're here somewhere. I'm going to put my teacher hat on. Someone had a question earlier. Or maybe not. Maybe it was a mic that wasn't turned off. Okay. Anybody else have any thoughts, questions, things they want to add?
I assume there'll be some sort of, this is Fred, some sort of template that we use for the mapping, and you're going to share that out as we go, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. So you can count on us to make these things as straightforward as possible, to share out templates. One of the first things you'll be getting is an assessment tool that is for your own learning and also for some level setting, right? So that we can help to see where you are and to measure progress and to hold ourselves accountable for that. That is in a very user-friendly format, and that will be coming to you. I also just, and I see Cynthia noting that you'll link from the center's website, and that is also helpful. If you're on the hopeforcollege.com website, you will see that you all now have a Real College Coalition webpage that'll continue to be built out as well. It's under Real College and under coalitions. I also just want to reflect for just a moment. A question came up in Ohio earlier today that I thought was just really important. The speaker wanted us to think about how much is already on your plates, right? And to recognize initiative fatigue. And I want you to know that we very much do. We don't conceive of this work, frankly, as an initiative. We think of it as a movement. We think of it as something that does take a lot of energy. And we center the humans in the work. Okay, and we say often that students are humans first. Frankly, so are all of you. So we're doing our best when we sit and we make plans to really think about that, right? And to think about how much time you can devote, how much mental energy you can devote, right? And those two things are very different. But we also need you, as the humans we're doing the work with, to tell us, right? To give us feedback, to tell us when it's too much, or tell us that you need more, right? Some of you may feel we move too slowly. Some of you may feel we move too quickly. I'm going to tell you what I tell my students in my class, right? Let me know. Help us be better teachers. Don't wait till the end, right? And fill out, we're not going to ever give you a Scantron, but don't wait to the end and say on the Scantron, that sucked. Help us make it better, okay? In doing so, we will be more effective with you. And frankly, we will be more effective with our other partners around the country. There are a number of us here who are teachers, have taught, enjoy teaching. So you should, expect that a bit, but there are also folks who are learning and growing who have been practitioners like yourselves, many of them in community colleges doing the work. And they have stepped out of the institutional setting and into our setting in an effort to try to help take this movement to scale, right? And so they bring their own personal experience, and hopefully that will be useful. But I also hope that you will help them to stretch and learn from all of you. One of the reasons we're so excited about working with Texas is that you have so much innovation going on in so many different pockets. It's amazing to, I guess I wish I could get off a plane these days, but I used to get off a plane in one place and get off a plane in another place in another corner of your state and have no idea what I was going to learn, but know that I was going to learn something. And so I am really also hoping personally that we'll be able to make at least one of these in person or partially in person hybrid during the engagement so that we can do that too. Okay.
So
Well,
Sarah, I'd like to add.
Please
that
go ahead.
This is Cynthia. So thank you so very much for kicking this off. We're so excited about this work. You're looking at a group of people who very much care about students and their needs and are poised and ready to really run with this like we're just ready to do. But what I want to say to all of you, my friends, my Texas friends, is that the reason we brought the Success Center to Texas was to bring coherence to the student success agenda. And in no way are we trying to veer from that. And that's why we bring your coaches in, and we're going to build this into your guided pathways work. This is not different. These are still the same students with the same needs, whether it's because they need a map to make it clear where they're supposed to go next in their classes, or whether they need you to help with their basic needs and securities. It's all the same thing. And so we're going to play this out in Texas just like that this is one thing that we're doing. When you get messages from us, it will have your Hope Center messages embedded within your Texas Pathways messages, your advanced work. It'll all be the same thing. And that's why we have your coaches here. So when you're having your regular coaching visits with your coach that you have a deep relationship with already, then you will also talk about both your Pathways work and your Hope Center work, because it's all the same thing. So I just wanted to lay that out to say that we're not trying, as Sarah was saying, this is not about adding extra initiatives or an extra fatigue or extra busy work. It's all about trying to help you get to where you're trying to get, as we will always do here at the center, at both of our centers. So thank you for letting me add that.
Oh, of course, Cynthia, and you've been such a good partner in that regard. I mean, it's the coordination is great, and hopefully going to reduce the number of emails in your inboxes, which I know is like primetime goals these days. Anybody have an additional question or thought that came up while we were just chatting?
Hi, Sarah. This is Charles Cook from Austin. And I want to just, I guess, emphasize what Cynthia and others have said, that it's all about the same goal, the same end, which is student success. So when we get the questions or the comments about initiative fatigue, always talk about how do we synchronize these efforts. We're doing things in Achieving the Dream. We're doing things in Pathways. Now the Hope Center, our strategic plan, our accreditation work. Well, let's look for ways in which we ensure that we're serving all of those ends with the same activities. So the extent to which we can synchronize our activities, it helps people really focus, and the end focus is for student success. So I think that's helpful to keep in mind.
Absolutely, and I appreciate that. And I have to say, we're doing that at the national level as well. I've been really, really grateful that over the last year, Complete College America has engaged us, for example, to try to bring more of the basic needs work into the work that they are advancing, and vice versa. So those points of integration and looking for those opportunities, right, and trying to, in a really specific way to bring things together. Just I hope that you all will continue to flag them. I think we understand their importance. Anyone else? Okay. Well, it's so interesting. Ohio did the exact same thing at the exact same time, 22 minutes short of the scheduled amount of time. I am so pleased then to offer you your first gift from the Hope Center, which is 22 minutes of free time. Okay, and we know how scarce that is, and it's a Tuesday. So we hope that this helps you get to Wednesday. We will only ever take up as much time as we absolutely need from you, and we will always be respectful and deliver on what we promised. Okay, it is so wonderful to be with all of you, and we're really looking forward to this work. And thanks for being here. And with that, we will sign off and allow you to go about your days supporting students. Okay, thank you so much.